She asked me to.
Thanks, that's great. My name is Jara Stefik. I'm the Supervisor of Corporate Communications for Norfolk County. I'll be your moderator tonight for the Seasonal Parking Pilot Project Public Consultation. As I mentioned, this meeting is recorded, and so I ask that you keep your mics on mute unless called upon. Join with me in the room are members of the Seasonal Parking Pilot Committee, Bob Fields, Project Manager Traffic Services, Teresa Olson, County Clerk, Bill Cridlin, General Manager Operations Division, Director of Roads, Devin Hunter, Supervisor Bylaw Enforcement, Jim Milson, and remotely on the line are Zvi Lifshitz, Director of Strategic Innovation and Economic Development, and Councillor Amy Martin. The purpose of tonight's session is to provide important details of the proposed pilot project, answer any questions you might have, and gather your feedback for presentation to Council. We are first going to start with a recorded presentation which outlines the project.
Welcome to the Norfolk County Seasonal Parking Pilot Project Public Consultation Session. We are glad you've made the effort to attend the session this evening and look forward to the questions and feedback that you may have on this initiative. Here's an outline of what we will be covering in the consultation forum tonight. We will provide you with an introduction to the project, how this meeting will be structured, some background on the project and some of the challenges we are facing here at the county with respect to seasonal parking. We will further touch on some of the municipal comparators that we have researched in Ontario. That have had similar parking stresses. We will then touch on the proposed parking changes being considered for 2022, the technologies being investigated, and circle back to some of the consultation and feedback that we have received to date. Tonight's presentation is a collaboration of Norfolk County's operations, clerks and bylaw, engineering and infrastructure, community development, corporate communication, and community services. The meeting tonight is being moderated by Norfolk County's communication team, and they will help assemble and answer as many of the questions that we received tonight. Questions that cannot be answered tonight will be reviewed and answers provided on the Norfolk County website. The main presenter tonight will be myself, Bob Fields, Norfolk's Project Manager, Traffic Services, and I'll be joined by Bill Cridlin, General Manager of Operations, Devin Hunter, the Director of Roads, Teresa Olson, Norfolk County Clerk, Jim Milson, Norfolk's Supervisor of Bylaw Enforcement, and Zvi Lifshitz, Director, Economic Development. This pilot project was initiated out of a continuing trend of increased parking and parking-related complaints received by Norfolk County Council and staff. Although parking issues have been a point of friction for several downtown areas and lakeshore communities, the impact of COVID and increased visitor demands has seen this issue be compounded. In 2021, Norfolk County Council directed staff to explore solutions with respect to parking-related challenges. In 2022-23, Norfolk will undertake a countywide parking study to look at a variety of issues facing our communities and provide recommendations to Council for action. Council further requested staff look at interim solutions to help with some of the county's more challenging areas while the study works through its mandate. This pilot project will provide input and data to the study to help inform decisions. Currently, Norfolk County does not charge for parking anywhere within the county. Although there is no cost to users for parking, it is important to recognize that there is a cost to the provision of parking. These costs include parking lot, space and construction, maintenance costs, repairs, engineering, staff resources, line painting, signage, communication, and enforcement measures. At this time, Norfolk County taxpayers are subsidizing the cost of parking regardless of who is using the parking: residents, customers, tourists, visitors, etc. Throughout this fall, staff have presented reports to council related to parking to address numerous concerns. One of the biggest complaints we receive is that there does not appear to be enough parking in many of our communities. Staff would argue that although this is the perception, we would conclude that the reality is more that there is not enough convenient parking. We also recognize that in order to address many of our parking challenges, there needs to be a revenue stream to offset the cost, other than just the tax base. Some of our common parking challenges include parking in no parking zones, parking in excess of posted time limits, parking on private property, and inconsistent usage of parking spaces. Individuals parking haphazardly and reducing the available parking footprints because of improper parking habits. Norfolk, in preparation for the previous council reports and this pilot project, reviewed municipal comparatives. We tried to focus on municipalities that have similar populations, lakeshore communities, and similar challenges. Prince Edward County, located on Lake Ontario in eastern Ontario, has had similar problems, and they have had to close the provincial park at times to allow congestion to dissipate. The county increased fines significantly and enhanced the parking fees. South Bruce Peninsula, which includes Sauble Beach, has a similar population, but also generated significant revenue in 2021. To offset increased parking demand, council increased parking rates. Aurelia also faced increased day visitors during COVID and had to increase parking fees. The municipality reached out to other neighbor municipalities to help facilitate parking expenses, as they believed that a significant portion of the visitors were coming from out of region. Barrie, although larger than Norfolk, had similar challenges with waterfront parking and downtown parking issues. Barrie implemented an online parking app and parking fees in the downtown and lakefront to manage parking. Lambton Shores, which includes Grand Bend, launched a mobile parking app and implemented increased parking rates to help mitigate increased parking demands. Blue Mountain implemented paid parking for visitors to help offset costs related to garbage, toilets, etc. Meaford launched a one-year pilot program, including the use of a mobile parking app to help with the increased parking demands. Their one-year pilot was very successful, and they have since implemented additional paid parking programming. To help mitigate some of the parking challenges and enforcement issues, staff have identified the following mitigation efforts. Countywide parking study. This study will explore all aspects of parking requirements in Norfolk, including new development, commercial business districts, on-street parking, and seasonal lakeshore community parking. This study will examine best practices for parking solutions in Ontario and form the foundation of how parking-related matters are addressed at Norfolk. Pilot project Downtown Simcoe. Staff, through the direction of council, extended parking lot restrictions to 48 hours to alleviate the demand for on-street parking and free up valuable parking spots for shoppers and visitors. Council has asked that this pilot be extended and a report brought back to council with future recommendations. Implementation of a seasonal parking pilot project targeting downtown Simcoe, Port Dover, Turkey Point, and Longpoint. This pilot will look at increased parking fines and the implementation of paid parking zones in these areas. Increased parking fines would be simple to implement with minimal internal cost to amend the current bylaw. In discussion with other municipalities, most were of the opinion that the current fine schedules set by municipalities was not a deterrent, and that motorists that violated the posted restrictions saw it simply as a cost of convenience. The increased parking fines would only be applied during peak demand months from May to September. Staff completed road tours with each of the local councillors of the noted communities to discuss the pilot project and obtain some feedback. Staff are proposing specific locations within each of the 4 communities that staff have determined appear to be the main friction points. These locations can be amended, reduced, or increased based on council direction after the public consultation period. The locations have been provided to council within the report attachments. The paid parking will be suggested to run from June 1st to September 6th in 2022. The report provided to council outlines suggested rates for the paid parking, which may be adjusted after the public consultation feedback has been received, and council may wish to amend them based on that feedback. Revenues from the paid parking would be allocated to a parking reserve that would be used for council-approved parking initiatives such as enhanced lighting, lot expansion, increased signage, refreshed line painting, and additional enforcement programs. Staff would propose that a portion of the revenues be allocated directly back to each of the communities where the paid parking is implemented to be used for community-specific initiatives. The map of Simcoe highlights the parking areas in downtown that would be affected by the pilot project. The zones being targeted are sought-after parking spots. By implementing the paid parking, it will help to turn over these spots to allow for more parking opportunities. Similar to Simcoe, this map highlights the parking areas in Port Dover that would be affected by the pilot project. The zones being targeted are similarly sought-after parking spots, and by implementing paid parking, it will help to turn over these spots to allow for more parking opportunities. The pilot project identified parking zones on Ordnance Ave and Cedar Street that would be targeted for paid parking. Several concerns have been brought forward by local residents that have minimal or no parking available to their properties and therefore rely completely on on-street parking. This map shows the areas along Erie Boulevard on Longpoint that are being affected by this pilot project. The only other spot being considered is the existing municipal lot at Abigail Becker. Norfolk County Council approved a public consultation plan to take place between December 2021 and January 2022 to seek feedback from Norfolk County residents, taxpayers, businesses, community associations, business organizations, and visitors. The consultation plan includes survey input, direct commenting, a virtual public session, and direct input from chambers of commerce, BIAs, and Board of Trades. An advertising campaign commenced in December through a combination of print ads, social media, website, and direct mail outs to key contacts and seasonal communities. The public consultation feedback will be compiled and summarized in the report being brought back to Council in the first quarter of 2022 to evaluate and determine if the pilot project should in fact be implemented. Some of the questions that we've received to date include things like, what type of amenities is Norfolk providing to these paid visitors? Who enforces the paid parking bylaw and where? Concerns over enforcement on Crown land, and whether or not resident passes will be issued. As mentioned previously, Norfolk County will be summarizing all these questions collected through email, survey, and at this public engagement session. A question and answer summary will be published on the county's webpage. It is hoped that this will be posted by next Friday, January the 28th. Some of the questions had more of a concerned tone rather than asking a specific question. Comments like, are we trying to keep people or visitors away? Have we tried other parking styles? And a general sense of not wanting to pay for on-street parking and people not believing that their family or visitors should have to pay either. Other questions focus on things like, aren't you just pushing the parking problem from one area to another? How many staff are to be assigned to this? What are people without off-street parking going to do, i.e. a cottage with no driveway? Some of the questions were location specific, like Port Dover and the pier and the new condos on Harbor Street. Concerns identified about using students to enforce the parking restrictions. Questions were asked about how Norfolk would handle motorists that chose to move away from paid parking zones to private lots. Unfortunately, in a situation like that, Norfolk County cannot enforce the municipal bylaw on private lots or parking areas. It would fall to the property owner to regulate or to enforce. Questions have come up about signage. We do believe we do have a solid handle on the number of signs and locations that will be required to make it convenient to the motorist. We had questions about tow trucks being available to remove illegally parked vehicles. The county would only bring in tow trucks as the last resort after tickets are issued. So for some of the takeaways, county staff have, through a variety of contact methods, including direct mailing, traditional media advertisements, web page notifications, and surveys, tried to get as much feedback from the community and the impacted users. It's clear from the web-based surveys that there is a real division in what the overall community desires in terms of parking solutions. The easiest solution would be to simply do nothing and kick the can down the road for another season. Staff are recommending that the pilot project be approved, as it has the potential for providing valuable information that will help develop the county-wide parking study that will be undertaken in 2022-23. One of the important takeaways from this consultation is that this pilot project can be implemented rather quickly at little cost to the county, and similarly, it can be canceled just as quickly if it doesn't work. Staff recognize that this project will cause some difficulties for some of our residents and businesses. We also hope that it will bring forward some relief to the parking challenges that we are facing. In December 2021, staff received direction from council to investigate the paid parking pilot and to undertake a 30-day consultation process to gather input from the business community, lakeshore communities, various associations, residents, and visitors to Norfolk. Once the consultation is complete, staff will be returning to council, likely in February of 2022, to seek council direction based on the feedback that we've received. Now that the formal presentation is complete, our communications team and the staff that are here tonight who have been monitoring the chat feature of the Teams meeting will present them to the staff team to answer. Any questions that cannot be readily answered tonight will be recorded, and an answer will be obtained and posted to the pilot project webpage for public information. This webpage will remain active for the duration of the project to provide a method for the public to provide feedback to the county. And the final slide is a reminder of the email that's available for inquiries and comments to be directed to the county. And with that, we will move over to the question and answer period of the presentation tonight. Thank you.
Stop presenting, hit the X. Yeah, the X in the top right.
Right there?
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Before we move to discussion, I'd like to go over meeting etiquette and decorum. We ask that until you're called upon to speak, your mic remain on mute. If you have a question for staff tonight, please use the raise hand button, the button to the top right of your screen, the happy face with his hand up. In the essence of time, we ask that only one question per participant at a time, and we will circle back around if time permits. Please also limit questions to new matters. If you have a question but have to leave or would prefer to write it, you can also use the show conversation button located to the left of the raise hand button. We will have note takers on the call that will write down the questions, but we might not be able to answer immediately, but we will follow up with a response. Finally, we understand that the subject can bring out passion in everyone, and it's important to have everyone's voice heard. So please treat each other and staff with respect, refrain from any kind of personal attacks or name calling, and be sure to allow others the opportunity to ask questions. Now we may move forward with the question and answer period. So at the top of the list, we have Helene. Helene, please go ahead.
So it's a little bit of a two-parter, just because I need to clarify something before I can actually ask the question. The increased fines that are referred to going from 75 to 150, that kind of thing. Are those fines limited to the areas where the meters are going to be, or are they countywide in all kind of time limited parking spots?
Paid parking zones. Yeah, so the those fines would be in the communities where the paid parking would be implemented.
But is it just where the meters are, or does it apply to anywhere that there is, for example, in Port Dover, there's 2-hour time limit on certain parking spots? Even that are not going to be metered as part of the program.
So I'll take that question. So right now, the original proposal was that those increased fines would be for the 3 lakefront communities. So it would be the entire community, not just the paid parking area. So Port Dover, Longpoint, and Turkey Point. Again, those are still under review and council will make a final determination. At this point, we were proposing those throughout the community. So all no parking zones in Port Dover, Longpoint, and Turkey Point would be subject to that increased fine.
Okay, so with that clarification, I want to ask, my question that I had put in writing about signage was specifically beyond the areas where there were going to be meters, where obviously you have to have signage. Will there be additional signage throughout the community to mitigate the pushing people away from paid parking to other free parking spots throughout the community, to make it clear that if they choose not to park in a paid parking spot, that those increased fines will be applied? So essentially, I just want to make sure that signage would be throughout the entire community and not just limited to the areas where the meters would be.
So I think that's a really great suggestion and definitely something we will put on our task list. We would definitely, our intention would be to sign the communities as best as possible to both educate and inform people. So absolutely, we will make sure that is on our list.
Thanks, Helene. Moving forward with Sam Henderson, please go ahead.
Okay, I would like to make the comment that I do feel that addressing parking in all these areas is like addressing apples and oranges. I feel like Longpoint is a very unique lakeside location. We don't have a lot of businesses. We do have a parking issue, but I feel like we need to step back and look at Longpoint as a big an important natural reserve where we already need to consider that we have a lot of parking, porta potties, overflowing garbage pails, and I think we need to get a baseline there to really look at that unique community as a whole before we lump it in with downtown Simcoe and Turkey Point and Port Dover. I feel Longpoint is a unique place because of its World Biosphere category, and parking needs to be considered uniquely there, and that's very important.
Your question.
Okay, my question would be, is that possible to do that? Do you think that all of these parking recommendations can be applied across the board when not all of these communities are the same? Longpoint is unique.
That's a great question, and each of those areas is very unique in their parking situations, but it was important for staff to at least set a starting point for this discussion. That's the reason we've had the maps put out at the start of this discussion, looking for feedback. That type of comment has come up frequently with regards to the capacity, the limitations on Longpoint, and the other considerations with garbage and washrooms and stuff like that. So we're certainly aware of that. Unfortunately, this pilot project is really just specifically looking at parking. And it's not looking at that whole overall scope of Longpoint that you brought up.
Thanks, Sam. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any other hand raised, but please feel free to.
Sam.
Sorry, what was that?
Do I have a hand up?
Oh.
Sam.
There was Sam that was just speaking. Are there any other follow-up questions from participants?
There's one in the chat, but it's not.
Helene, go ahead.
I'd be asking it in direct response to the previous comment, just because, I mean, I appreciate that all the different areas are unique. I'm just curious from I believe it was Sam's perspective, just what exactly she feels the differences are that would fundamentally change the approach to the parking program, because I absolutely understand that that each of the areas are different, but I'm curious how that would fundamentally change an approach to the program, other than possibly changing the times that parking would need to be paid or the amounts charged. All of those are, I assume, possible to customize from location to location under the system that the county is looking at. I could be wrong, but so I'm just very curious to hear a little more clarification on her side from what those exact differences that would fundamentally change the entire approach to parking, and not just those very specific executional details.
So I appreciate that you were looking for clarification from another person who was attending tonight, but we really don't want to get into having debates between different attendees. So I would suggest that, you know, if you've got a comment or a question regarding that, to send it through to the Parking at Norfolk email, and we'll add it to the list of comments and concerns that we summarize to the best of our ability for the information that will be posted to the webpage next week.
Oh, that's absolutely fine. I wasn't really trying to start a debate. It was just, it felt like a piece of information that was important to actually qualify the point that she had made. I'm not
Control Shift
against it.
Yeah.
It just felt like there was more that could be clarified.
Okay, thank you. No problem. I appreciate that.
There's a question from the chat. It says, my question in writing on the survey was, what are you going to enforce on Friday the 13th? And how many more enforcement officers need to be hired to police this? Given the time frame, it would be prudent to hire college or university students
Put
to
my
help
hand
out.
on the talk. Okay, good.
Need someone's getting feedback.
Yeah, can I, you just ensure you're muted if you're not speaking, please?
Unmute. Okay.
So I'll take a crack at the October the 13th comment, but I may rely on Brendan to.
You're ready for the next question.
Okay, I'm getting some feedback. Sorry about that. So obviously the Port Dover Friday the 13th event would be a fairly big variation from our paid parking pilot project. It would be very difficult to go in and enforce parking restrictions when there's 100,000 people coming. So there's specific bylaws that are created for that event to occur. So our efforts wouldn't be directed at trying to tackle parking on a one-day event like that. It would be more focused on the whole seasonal aspect and not just one specific event.
No, I fully agree with Bob. Friday the 13th would be a 2 or 3 day exception from this, because Bob says the bylaws are written where certain roads are no parking and parking allowed motorcycle parking only. So that just was yeah. So I don't totally agree with Bob. Friday the 13th would be separate from this.
Okay, and now we're going to move on to Laura Jerome. Please go ahead.
Yes, I'm having a problem with you have areas that are non-parking and you have parking areas. I'm talking about Hastings Drive, which is overflowing on a regular basis all summer long. You've tried implementing parking and no parking signs to no avail. Nobody listens to them. And the no parking signs are still there bylaw goes down, they have never been ticketed down there in the last couple of years. They tried it the first year and then that was the end of it. Yet the no parking signs are still there. You can't even get emergency vehicles down that road. And if you implement parking, paid parking in the rest of Longpoint, what happens to this area that had already been restricted for no parking?
Well, thank you for that. Oh, sorry.
So that's my question. How are you going to implement something that you've already been trying to implement for quite a few years? I think the signs have been up there for close to 6 years now.
Thank you for that question. I may have to rely on some of my colleagues here in the enforcement group, but certainly, I am aware of that area and I have driven down that road myself. And I know there are certainly fairly large demands on there in the summer months, but with regards to enforcement, is there anything you want to add, Jim?
Thanks, Bob. Just for the purposes of the summertime, we do have a dedicated student that works all of Longpoint and all of Turkey Point, two different students. So there is a good coverage there. You have to understand that there's a significant amount of traffic on Erie compared to Hastings, and it takes a lot of effort for one person to keep on top of that. Got a lot of good feedback this year on the fact that there is a dedicated student there for the last 2 years and for the work that they've been able to do. So it's not perfect. We understand there is traffic on Hastings, and we certainly take that under advisement. We have asked for a third student for this year for parking, and if that's provided, then we'll have even better coverage, I think. So we'll take that under advisement for Hastings, but I guess they can't be everywhere, and they do their best they can.
Thanks, Jim.
My problem, can I just get back to that question? The problem I'm having is not just the parking situation. Emergency vehicles can't get down. I was trying to get to my place and it took me over 35 minutes. 35 minutes. How, if there's an emergency, a drowning, have to get emergency boats in for the rest of Longpoint, which includes the provincial park. How are you going to do this when I can't get down there with a simple vehicle because of parking on both sides of a road that can't even handle parking at all?
Well, we're getting a little bit outside of the parking, which is with a lot of people who want to speak about parking right now. That's certainly a good question, though, but my short answer would be to contact OBP to attend, and if they're parking legally, the potential is that they could be towed if they're interfering with movement of traffic. But we can probably circle back to the parking part of it. That'd be great.
Okay, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Laura. Moving on to Marion.
Yes, I'm a resident of Port Dover, and my one concern is that you are starting it as the parking at the beginning of May. If what you are doing is targeting people going to the beach, I don't think too many people start the beach until the middle of May, and then it's only usually on weekends. I would like to see the timing change to weekends only, starting May 15th. That means that me as a resident can go down to Willie's and have supper or have lunch and not have to pay. My other concern is that there are some areas of Port Dover up by Powell Park, which I understand are 2-hour time limit parking, but I don't remember ever seeing too many signs up there. And that comes back to the question of the first person that asked there about signage. So if their area is 2 hours, then there has to be enough signs up that people know that it's 2 hours and that there will be fines.
Sorry, I missed that. Was that Marion?
That was Marion. Yes.
Well, thank you, Marion. Definitely take a look at that with regards to the signage at Powell Park. I believe that if there are signs up there, whether there's enough or not, that remains to be seen, but we'll definitely take a look into that. I think in some of the early information we were looking at May to September, those dates are still relatively flexible. We still have to report back to council, so those dates could change in terms of what we implement and what time range that we look to put this enforcement into place.
Just because on the timing, most locals avoid the beach area in July and August, but we like going down there in May and June.
I certainly appreciate that, and I understand that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marion. Moving to Carrie Fletcher.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, again.
Oh, okay. This is my first time. I'll try and be as brief as I can. I live in Dover Wharf. I'm an owner of one of the units in that new condo down by the harbor. And when we moved in, we actually wanted to buy this place and purchased it 6 years ago. We've been waiting and waiting. We finally moved in July. One of our concerns when we bought this property was there was only 48 parking spaces underneath the building for 48 units. We own 2 vehicles. At the time, we were told that there's 13 parking spots out in front of the building, which could be used for visitors and for people who live here who have more than 1 vehicle. It was deemed to be a common area. We pay our condo fees now, and that parking area is serviced, and it was serviced on Monday by private individuals who cleaned the snow. And I actually spoke to the person who was using the front end loader, and I said, "Who pays you to do this?" And he said, "Dover Wharf does." Okay, I digress. What I'm getting at is that the 13 spots in front of the Harbor Wharf going to be exempt from pay per parking?
Thanks for that question, Carrie. And to be quite honest with you, that just came up to our attention in the last little bit. So we're in the process of working through nailing down those spots in terms of how they came to be with our planners and engineering folks. So no decision has been made on that at this point. And although it doesn't show it currently on the maps that were there for consultation, it still hasn't been determined yet at this point. So
I noticed that too. I'm hoping that it's going to be exempted, because living here, I need a parking spot. I mean, if I have to pay $20 a day, that's $600 a month, and I could be subject to $75 fines if I don't pay. Where am I supposed to park my second vehicle where I don't have to pay around here? It would be about a 6 to 8 block walk, as far as I understand. And without whining, we are paying around $5,000 a year taxes here and our condo fees. And I just hope that common sense prevails here, and that we either get a permit for our window, our windshield, or these 13 parking spots are exempted from the program. It's not sour grapes, it's just common sense. I mean, anyway, I've said my piece. I appreciate the time. I'm going to go to mute now. Thank you very much.
all right, thanks for that question, Carrie. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Carrie. Moving to Larissa Bredick. Please go ahead. Larissa, if you are speaking, you are on mute. You'll have to unmute.
Won't let me unmute.
Oh, it won't let her unmute.
We can come back to it.
Yeah,
I'll also put it in the chat.
If you want to put it in the chat, Larissa, go ahead and we'll read it from there. There is a question in the chat from HJ. Teresa has identified the first part, which I'm not sure if you're a he or a she, but HJ requested that, or mentioned that we requested all to send in questions in writing before the meeting, and asked if we would be able to answer some of those questions. And the question, a follow-up was, are you just going to put it in the pilot without any protection for the taxpayers? Once again, this is unique Longpoint, whereby deeded properties in the lake.
Sorry, I'm not.
Are you going to put in the pilot without any protection for the taxpayers? Once again, this is a unique Longpoint property whereby deeded properties are in the lake. I'm not quite sure I understand. Could you follow up with that, HJ, and provide a little more detail, and we'll come back to you? Okay, we're going to go to Jesse. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jesse here. My question is, it is specific to parking there. What technology are you bringing in with respect to parking, especially in more of a beach community like Longpoint, Turkey Point, Port Dover? Is the technology capable of pre-booking spots, automation of fines? Because I think that if you do have this level of technology, it should be used because it'll help mitigate, increased traffic flows to these particular communities. And, the other thing with Longpoint, with the increased parking that you're proposing, that is important with respect to that particular biosphere, because it is bringing in more traffic into the community where we see animals that are getting killed and so on and so forth. People are speeding recklessly. It increases pedestrian strike possibilities. So I think it is a concern. And I don't know if any of those other communities have increased parking capabilities that you're looking at, but those are something that you definitely need to be or have on your radar. And that's all I have to say.
Right. Well, thanks for that multiple part question, Jesse. I'll do my best to try and answer it. Your audio was cutting in and out a bit, but I think I got the gist of it. With regards to technology, we have been talking to a couple different vendors. There's basically two types of technology we're looking at. One is a mobile or app-based, so it's a tap and go or a QR code where you scan with your mobile phone. Recognizing that not everybody has mobile phones or don't have data plans or not interested in going with that kind of technology, we are looking at pay stations as well. Those would be like the traditional ones you see in other urban areas that have the ability to take a card or scan in as well. And in terms, I think the other part you had was pre-booking. Because there's no regulated control for a lot of these parking spots, it's kind of first come, first serve. We don't have the ability to pre-book or reserve spots, so that wouldn't be possible. And with regards to some of the other stuff you're talking about, we certainly recognize that there's a more fulsome discussion that has to happen for Longpoint at some point. Unfortunately, this is really just the pilot project for parking, and we're really not looking at all aspects of Longpoint with regards to the capacity of Longpoint and washroom, speeding, garbage collection and stuff like that. So it's more just looking at this pilot project, and determining whether it's going to be viable and to basically come up with recommendations for council for their determination. So thanks again for the question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. Larissa put her question in the chat. Her question is related to downtown Simcoe. They're small business owners. They own a coffee shop, and they simply don't experience the same influx of tourists during the summer months as beach communities. We rely on our daily customers who are Norfolk community residents. Asking our customers to pay $2 extra to make their daily stop will certainly discourage them from coming. We are concerned many of the customers will opt to take their business elsewhere, such as along the Queensway. Will there be any consideration for these issues, such as the 20-minute grace period for local customers?
Thanks. Great question, Marissa. Thank you for asking it. We've been hearing that loud and clear from a couple fronts, and we've seen it in other jurisdictions as well. There are opportunities to do unique things like offer 30 minutes free parking, things like that. Councillor Martin has also asked staff to report back to council later this spring with a 15-minute parking criteria report. So those types of things are still on the table. We're still looking at that for some of the other urban areas, which might kind of lend itself to some of these areas that have high turnover traffic where they're only in and out, and there's really no need to pay for 2, 3, 4 hours of parking. So certainly those are some of the things that we're looking at. So it's not going to be just a blanket thrown over the urban area in downtown Simcoe for that parking program. So we're hoping that we can provide some flexibility in that as well.
Thanks, Bob. Helene has another question. It says, to the point of technology, does the platform being looked at actively notify enforcement workers that payment has expired with no payment, implying there may be someone staying beyond what they paid?
So great question, Helene. The technology we're looking at currently, from a pilot perspective, we wouldn't be looking at going with all the gadgets and bells and whistles to start. What we would be looking at for this implementation, if it goes forward, would basically be handheld scanners or mobile apps that are on phones that are already issued to the bylaw officers. So they would have to scan the license plate or open up a database for that parking zone and then compare the license plates that show up to determine whether they're not in violation of the parking restrictions. So it would be great if we had technology for that. It would make life simpler for Jim and his staff, but it would be certainly a lot more cost intensive than what we're looking at currently for this pilot. So.
Just to clarify where that was coming from, the Montreal parking system does something like that. When all it does is pings an enforcement officer saying X parking spot, you know, A44, payment has expired, no one has filled the spot. And that just advises the enforcement officer with that ping that might be a spot worth verifying. So it's not really a fully automated system of any kind. All it is kind of something that calls attention to the enforcement officers so that they know where to look instead of just kind of wandering around without having specific, places to go where there could be infractions. I just thought I'd clarify that.
I appreciate that, Helene, and it's a good thing to bring up. I think we'll definitely talk to whoever we select as a vendor. If this pilot goes forward, we will speak to them about whether their system has that functionality. From the ones we have spoken to, they do indicate that they're more customer focused. So their pushes will come out to the actual customer to say, you're 15 minutes away from expiring. Do you want to add time? So it's more on that side of it from the application. But I would imagine a lot of that stuff is programmable. It's just whether or not we want to pay for the service. But we'll certainly follow up with that. That's a good question. Thank you.
Thanks, Helene. Mohan Deep has a question. Please go ahead. And I'm sorry if I said your name incorrectly.
No, that's all right. Thank you. It's just a quick question. So I definitely understand that the vendors may have their own partnerships when they implement the parking system. Is the county looking to, or have they talked to the vendors about supporting local companies during the implementation process? Some may know I'm a community rep with ExecuLink, and we're leading, I'd say, Port Dover, Longpoint, and Turkey Point with technology. We have the fiber there for telecommunications, and the parking system do require that. So just wanted to get that answered. That's all. Thank you.
Sorry, I think it was Mohan, sorry.
Yeah.
At least that's how it came in on your email before. So thank you for your question that you sent in earlier. So we haven't got to that stage of talks with the vendors at this point. So if the report goes to council and it's approved, then we'll be seeking direction from council to negotiate some of those things. So we certainly always look for local involvement where we can, but it's not often possible in some situations, but we'll certainly keep that in mind. So.
And if I can just weigh in, I guess we really would want to hit home, this is a pilot project. There's no guarantee it will go past this pilot process. So some of the inquiries we've had are hard to provide a long-term decision on, because we don't know that it's going to go longer than that 3 or 4 month period. So we want to make sure that we scale the project adequately for the resources we have to gather the data we need to see if it's a worthwhile program for Norfolk County. So some of those things we may not be able to touch on during the pilot. If the pilot goes forward, if it's successful and we look long term, then those are bigger picture questions and items that we can consider.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. In the chat, there's a question from Terry, or a comment from Terry at the Simcoe Chamber. Each location is unique and should be looked at separately when dealing with parking issues. Free parking in downtown entices people to shop local instead of heading to Amazon. At this time, the local merchants need all the help they can get. Special event parking passes could be an option, as well as designated larger parking areas such as school lots, paid, could be considered. Residential passes would also be beneficial. Are there any comments on Terry's comment?
So thanks for that comment, Terry, and certainly we've heard loud and clear through the consultation phase that resident passes are something the majority of people are writing in about. That although the pilot currently is not recommending residential passes, it's certainly something that we'll have to have that conversation with council to determine whether or not that's the direction we move forward or not. It certainly adds to the complexity of implementing a pilot project to try and manage residential passes, verify license plates, property ownership and things of that nature. It's not a simple process and it would require a lot more dedicated staff time to do it. So those are some of the concerns with regards to running a pilot, with regard to the residential passes, with regards to free parking in Simcoe and some of the urban areas and stuff like that. It's certainly a message that keeps coming up. We've heard numerous times, you used to have parking meters downtown, we took them out for a reason. So we are certainly aware of some of that sentiment that's out in the community and we are taking it to heed. So a lot of those comments will filter their way back to council so that when council then gets a chance to review what staff has to bring forward, they'll certainly have all that feedback in mind before they make a decision. So
a comment from HJ in the chat. Lake erosion has caused limited beach space. Sorry, just admit that. Most of the beach that is left is private property. So the parking program goes in inviting to all to a beach that is not Crown land. Furthermore, signage is needed on both Harmony Lane and Conductor Thoroughfare, as these are private thoroughfares, not for public use except for the property owners directly behind the lake front properties of that area. So that's a comment, I guess. Is there any weigh in on that?
Thanks, HG, for that question. It has come up from other commenters as well, from people responding to the survey. I'm not an expert with regards to the lake erosion and some of the issues that are happening with that beach. I do know in the past that, and Mr. Cridlin can step in if he wants, but there have been situations where we've had to close some of the beach accesses, but regardless, people are going to come, they're going to find their way there. So we're trying to implement a paid parking program that's going to hopefully help in the long run. Or if it doesn't, we can cancel it, but at least it's going to allow us to collect some data. Right now, we haven't got much in terms of data for the parking that's happening in Longpoint. So this is basically us just trying to get a start to help inform us for future decisions.
Okay, moving to John Henderson, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your input. Just two questions on the bylaw for enforcement. Will the bylaws through the pilot project be adjusted so that these charges can be enforced? When we went through this in Longpoint, it took months and months to adjust from a 2-hour to a 4-hour parking strategy for enforcement because we had none of that elsewhere in Norfolk County. Will that be done for just a simple pilot project? And secondly, for Jim and his crew, will the use of some of the afforded technologies, handheld devices, etc., scanners, will they make sense for somebody driving past? We have approximately 3.4 kilometers of on the side of the road parking in Longpoint. Are these enforcement personnel going to be ramped up so that they can walk this and enforce the parking violations? or will they try to drive it while holding a handheld device that may be contrary to the Provincial Offences Act? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, John. I think I'll let Jim take a crack at that enforcement side.
Thanks, John. Good to hear from you again. Well, a couple of things. The time to complete any changes in fines would have to go through the Ministry Attorney General. There's a process for doing that, and I think we're still in time to do that. Council's looking for feedback on from public consultation and is willing to act and to put something in place in a timely manner to support the project for the summer. So I don't think that timing is going to be an issue. We're looking at different technologies, John, and we haven't decided on anything, of course. You bring up a good point, and I've asked the same question, because physically to do that type of enforcement will either require walking that length or possibly some technology that uses license plate scanning from a vehicle. So those are the mechanics of doing that operation, and all good questions. We're just not there yet with the mechanics part of it, but what we're trying to settle on is, you know, through the public consultation, what the public would like to see in a certain area or what they don't want to see, so we can bring those things back to council for their decision, and then we'll work on the mechanics afterwards. But it's a very good question, and it's one that I've asked you for.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim.
Welcome.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. A question in the chat from Helene. In Simcoe and Norfolk Street, it looked like on the map there is a decent stretch where the paid parking is only one side of the street, when I believe there are still parking spots on the other side. If those are not paid, will that not be strange that one side is paid and one is free?
That just must be an error. It would be paid on both sides.
It's just an error on the map.
It would be paid on both sides.
So it's a good question. Thanks for that. I think it might be an error on the map, but we'll certainly look into that. I believe it's something, yeah, that's in front of the bank and in front of the pharmacy. So we'd have to take a quick look at that as well. Sorry about that.
Question in the chat from HJ. How do you think that this program is going to benefit the taxpayers of Longpoint, whereby all businesses have their own parking?
So thanks for the question, HJ. In terms of how do we think it'll benefit the overall taxpayers in Longpoint or in Norfolk County in general, certainly our expectations for this pilot would be that it's revenue positive. It's not going to cost more to run it than we will recover in parking fees or in fines. Certainly for the pilot, and from the conversations that we've had with other municipalities, it certainly is an opportunity to generate some revenue from visitors that are coming, and it helps to turn over those parking spaces so that they are available and not taken up long term by people who are parking there longer than. Okay, sorry, we just got out there.
Okay. A question in the chat from Sam Henderson. Are you able to provide any clarity on what the changes to the Abigail Becker parking lot will be, given the capacity will increase by a third?
I think I can take that one, Jared. Yeah, being a pilot and having no formal authorization from council yet, when we looked at Abigail Becker parking lot, you've got, I believe, a line of posts there. You've got what I'll call more or less parking on Abigail Becker, the paved roadway, and you've got the sand part. And I think what we looked at is the limits of the parking lot could be expanded slightly to the south, slightly to the west, and also if we're moving the line of posts to the east, if you, I'm sure who's ever asked the question, I think it's unknown answer, know the dynamics, we could put another lane of parking out onto the actual travel portion of the road. So it's been drawn up in GIS, it will fit, and that's kind of what we're looking at. We'll have all the details, but there is the ability to straighten things up, tidy some lines up, and expand to give it some more parking.
Thanks, Bill. Ben Warren, please go ahead.
Further to that question, it ends up being, so is the plan to do those changes to the parking lot at Abigail Becker for the pilot?
Yeah, a good question again. I think we will, as the report goes forward, we'll chat about that. The other thing is we could also look at parking in Longpoint. I'm going into the larger comprehensive parking study that's going to be done this year. It could become part of that, because I think if we look at, I don't want to get too far out of the gate here, it makes, you know, promises that we can't keep, but we are looking outside of the box to straighten up and you know, both in Longpoint and Turkey Point, areas that people park on now, they could be upgraded, say, from sand bases to some gravel and made to be bigger in size. But again, we can't get too far out until we get council's blessing on the pilot, and whether they roll in with this or whether we present our ideas to the consultant in the bigger comprehensive parking study and say this is something staff thought of, and it would all come together in that final project. Because I do think that there are ways to gain parking spaces, and I'll just concentrate on Turkey Point and Longpoint now with some fairly simple and fairly low cost items.
So as a follow-up to that, it ends up being, as one of your committee mentioned earlier, this is a pilot, and if the pilot goes through as one step, and then what the pilot finds out will affect the project going forward. There, just so that it ends up being, it's not just the parking lot that everybody has to be aware of. I think there's a possible public safety issue from the point of view that there's 5 super boxes from Canada Post, which have 80 mailboxes in that are, the permanent residents go there on a daily basis, Monday to Friday. And it ends up being that intersection from a traffic flow point of view is tough right now in the summertime with the amount of parking that's in there, both in that parking lot and at the business across the street. So increasing it by 1/3, maybe it may want to be considered by your committee to save some of the money in doing improvements to that parking lot before the pilot, leave the parking lot the way it is and monitor it to see whether the increase in parking can even be allowed based on traffic flow, allowing the residents and visitors on Beach Avenue to still go up and down Abigail Becker, and the residents that are trying to get to their post office box to be able to get into that area as well.
Yeah, very good point. And I think I kept going back to the larger comprehensive study. Items like that would be filtered through that. So I totally agree with what you're saying.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ben. It looks like John Henderson has another question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and just to follow up to that last question and comments, they're very well made. The concerns about Abigail Becker, while the parking lot and the distinction of how much land in that parking lot is owned by Norfolk County, which could be expanded to make additional parking spots, while valid, should also be taken into consideration with the gross amounts of parking that is being charged privately that is actually road allowance on Abigail Becker. The business that's been there for umpteen years and several owners charges, and they're actually parking vehicles and charging for them, and they're on county road allowance. And it's about time that Norfolk County step up and straighten that out. And you can tell where the road allowance is by where the mailbox, the bulk mailbox that was previously mentioned, actually stands. And that's a very accurate delineation of the property lines there. That road allowance that goes down there for the safety of the people and the safety of the people accessing their cottages and residents on Beach Ave as well as the day visitors, needs to be cleaned up. If you're going to include the increase in parking, which I have no problem with, if it's on county free or paid county property, no problem. But we need to clean up the paid parking, that it's taking illegal spots at taxpayers' expenses. And I think that needs to be addressed in this pilot and on a long-term ongoing basis. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, John.
Okay. Looks like Lisa has a question in the chat. How much revenue is expected or estimated?
I'll try to take a shot at it, and then Teresa can follow up. So it's a bit of a moving target. We've looked at the number of parking stalls that are being proposed in the pilot project. Unfortunately, I don't have them in front of me right now, but depending on when it gets started and whether we actually reduce some of the footprint for the pilot, we are having some internal chats among staff as to whether or not we should do some modifications to Longpoint and Turkey Point, just based on some of the things that we've looked at over the last 2 weeks. It could range anywhere from $300,000 or $400,000 up to probably $700,000 or $800,000. That would be then reduced by the cost of putting in pay stations and signs, and then whoever we go with for the pilot, they would be charging a convenience fee or a transaction fee that would come off of that. And those are still to be negotiated. So if council approves the staff report and we move forward, those are the types of things that we would be negotiating with the vendor. So it's a bit of a moving target. We certainly see it's going to be a positive impact on the overall tax levy, but to nail it down to an exact dollar amount is really difficult.
Thanks, Bob. Marion has a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, and when I submitted the written questions before, I'm one of the ones that suggested that it's tight parking on the Port Dover Pier if you're parking at 90 degrees. So if you compare the parking there to, say, the No Frills parking lot, it's about 5-6 feet shorter. And if you've ever been down there and there happens to be a big truck in one of the parking spots, there isn't really much room to get yourself unparked. Especially, I'm not quite sure where the property line is there. I don't know if it's the asphalt or whether it has to be onto some of the sand.
Sorry, Mary, you're talking the side of the pier on the sand side towards Callahan's?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think if people park just on the asphalt, it's almost impossible to get your car out if there happens to be a truck, because they're longer.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you that it certainly is a challenge if you get larger vehicles there. I think your question in the submission as well also talked about whether there be ample room for turning around if someone got all the way to the end and figured out there wasn't any parking spaces left. So I did take a look at the street view, and it looks like there's a bit of a no parking delineated zone in front of the Fisherman's Memorial. So I would hope that there'd be enough space there for a motorist to make that turn. It might be a multi-point turn, certainly more than a 3-point turn, but I would hope that they'd be able to get turned around at the end and get back out. So
I have tried it a couple of times, and it is a multi-time turn to get turned around, and people encroach on it. And if anybody encroaches on it, then basically you're stuck.
Yeah, and we certainly don't want people playing bumper cars on the pier. So certainly we'll have a look at that, and we'll make note of it. Thanks, Barry.
If you do enforce that there is a turning, you could always change the one side to parallel parking instead of 90 degree. you'd lose a few spots, but you might get better traffic flow.
No, thank you for that, Marion, because again, getting off of the pilot, going to the major study to be done later this year, those are all items that staff will definitely feed the consultant, because there are a few other parking spots too that, you know, it may, we want to look at the number of parking, but we also want traffic flow to be improved and ease of ingress and entry and things like that. So that would be a prime example where it's kind of contrary to what we're trying to do, but you know, maybe the last 2 parking spots have to be removed there for the facts that people can turn around, because parking spots, total numbers are what we're trying to maximize, but we're always trying to maximize the efficiency of them as well. So that has been noted to feed the consultant. So good foresight on that on your behalf.
Thanks, Marion. At this point, we're sitting at just under 20 minutes left of the call. So we do have a couple more questions in the chat. I'm going to go to Sam here. It says, given this is a temporary pilot project, what are the additional parking spots being permanently installed in Abigail, Becker, Erie Boulevard past Howie? Why are they? I'm sorry.
I think I could start. So if I understand the question, the only additional parking spots that I'm aware of would be, if any work, would be an Abigail Becker parking lot. I'm not sure where they go past Howie, so maybe it's just referring to that. I think it was just part of when we were putting, the two kind of merged with the paid parking, as well as if there were any, I'll maybe call them quick wins that staff could do to increase parking or the availability of parking. And I think perhaps this does tie, let's not get too hung up on the Abigail. It probably will be more of the comprehensive review before we get there. But council may, when they look at the pilot, want to look at a few things with parking and get some low-hanging fruit. And staff just want to be aware that that stands up to staff as we could get additional parking there. I hope I've helped answer that.
Sam said, I believe an additional 33 spots were being installed on Erie past Howie, heading east toward the provincial park.
Yeah, it shows there on the pilot.
Okay. Again, that's something we'll have to review as a committee. I didn't think that we were adding any more parking along Erie Boulevard. It was just Abigail Becker to maximize some parking there. So we'll pull that together, maybe some bad mapping on our behalf. But again, great questions, and we're looking for these are the ideas we're looking for. So appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam. Another question in the chat from Karen Deans. Just to clarify from the slide presentation, can a private property owner set up a parking lot on their property and charge for parking?
Thanks, Karen. I'm glad you asked the question. It's something we run across from the enforcement side a number of times every year, not just in Longpoint, but in other areas of the county. So the answer is no. It's not permitted use of residential property or a property in zoning. So we have in the spot that you and John have referred to, the property owners have spoken with, and they know there's follow-up coming in this year. So we'll have to take it one day at a time. My intention is to provide some support to the students this summer on the weekends from time to time, and if that's been going on or is going on, I'll have that personal chat with them as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
And I think the slide that you were referring to, Karen, was more specific to there are a few businesses in some of the communities that have large parking lots that maybe throughout the years have dabbled a bit in charging for their parking at their business. That's a separate matter than a private industry.
We have to go by what's in zoning.
Yeah.
And if it's not a permitted use in zoning, then they can't run a parking lot there.
Okay, we have enough time for 2 more questions. Either put it in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to ask it. I'm not seeing any at this point. Oh, Councillor Martin, please go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
I think I'd have that figured out by now. Thanks, Steph. I'm not sure if I count, but I do pay my taxes. So I just wanted to actually make a couple of comments on some stuff that I heard in some questions and staff also touched on all over the place. So one comment from Sam initially was concerning, resources being spent on emptying our garbages and porta potties and whatnot. I think a beautiful thing about the pilot project is funding can go towards things like that should your council member and the rest of council and staff deem it necessary. In Port Dover, I think some of the revenue should be used for a water fountain. So, I think that we can use the revenue from this stuff to improve on some of these other areas of concern. I wanted to just mention to staff, I thought Marion's comment about the weekends and mid-May was an excellent suggestion. And if that is something you're hearing, I would love to see that kind of fleshed out and brought back in a report. I think that has a lot of merit to it. One other point I wanted to make to staff was regarding Carrie's comments and the 13 spots and exemptions. If by chance the technology had the ability to check with license plates, I think a really neat thing, and I'll tell you this now in case you can bring it back, but would be to identify local parking passes and attach them to a plate so they're not shared or given out, but this license plate is associated with X number of passes. And then my only other comment was Larissa's comment about it kind of not being worthwhile for a $2 coffee, and I think it was Mr. Milson or somebody, maybe it was Bob, commented on not everyone having cell phones. And so I wouldn't totally be opposed to the idea of a piece of equipment being able to toss a quarter in it for that exact reason. If I wanted a coffee that bad and I had a quarter in my coffee cup in my car, I'd throw it into a metered unit and run in to grab a coffee, even if it meant that I didn't use the full time on it. So just wanted to make those couple of comments, and thank you, staff. This was really great and informative, even for me.
Thank you. Final question goes to Laura Jerome. Please go ahead, please.
It's just a quick question. Would from the previous caller to Amy, as far as being able to use your property for renting for paid parking, would that we be able to obtain paperwork to confirm that when the bylaw officers do come by? We have many problems with that situation in Longpoint, and I'd like to be able to at least show the bylaw officers that this is not allowed in Longpoint.
Laura, are you just asking for confirmation of the bylaw in writing?
Correct.
Okay, yeah,
Would that be available?
Yeah, if you email staff, I'm sure they can get that to you, or I can help with that.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Are there any closing comments from any of the staff, or you want me to wrap it up? Okay, just before we close, I just wanted to touch on the survey. So for those of you who completed the survey prior to December 29th, unfortunately, there was a technical issue that early results were not captured. So if you completed during that time, or if you've yet to complete the survey, we ask that you spend 5 minutes and provide your input by the end of the month. Your feedback and opinions are of the utmost importance for this committee and council. The link can be found at norfolkcounty.ca/NC parking pilot. And if there's no further questions, this wraps up tonight's engagement session. Thanks for attending, and be sure to check the website later next week.
Thank you.
Boss is going to sleep on broadcasting.
I can't.
I can't. Is that?
Oh, there it goes.
There we go.